Good evening and welcome to the second Rural Mental Health Connections webinar. I'm Julie Lux and I'm Vice President of Communications at Rural Minds. And before we begin tonight's presentation, we wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge the tragic events that occurred today in Texas. Our thoughts and prayers are with all of the people affected by this horrible tragedy, and especially the family and loved ones of the people who were lost today. So thank you all for attending this evening. We are very excited to be focusing on the powerful combination of someone from rural America sharing personal lived experiences with mental illness and the collaboration of a network of rural community leaders who recognize the urgent need to confront mental health challenges in rural America. Encourage conversations, which is what we're here to do tonight, to help destigmatize mental illness and provide information and services to help those who are struggling with mental illness. We do want to mention as we begin to honor confidentiality and the privacy of those who are attending this webinar, just a couple of reminders that attendees, so those of all of you with us who are watching tonight, will only be able to see the webinar presenters. No one watching will be able to, will have your name or your image on the screen or that of anyone else who is watching the webinar. However, we do want to encourage you to ask questions. Any questions submitted by attendees will only be seen by me, the presenters, and so we will do our very best to keep things as anonymous as possible. I think that we have a Q&A at the bottom where people can submit their questions. There you may have to choose to share that anonymously. So, but we encourage you, please, to have those questions ready a little bit later on in the presentation. We wanted to just talk a little bit as we begin here about the sponsor, one of the sponsors, which is Rural Minds. Rural Minds is a not-for-profit that was launched in October of last year to serve as the informed voice for mental health in rural America and to provide mental health information and resources. Rural Minds recognizes the value of partnering with organizations with a common goal. In the spirit of collaboration, this event, we are very pleased to say, is being presented by Rural Minds along with the National Grange. And we are pleased to have with us tonight to tell us a little bit about this partnership of Rural Minds and the National Grange is Pete Pompper. Pete is a community services director with the National Grange, and we are delighted to have you with us this evening, Pete. Please tell us a little bit about this great new partnership.
Well, Julie, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you everyone at Rural Minds for this opportunity. Okay, National Grange, we are excited to have this opportunity to partner with Rural Minds. We are, a little history on the National Grange, we were organized in 1867. Right after the Civil War, the government realized there are issues with the rural life in America, especially in the South. They sent gentlemen to do research, study, see what was going on. And in Oliver Hudson Kelly's journeys, he realized that rural America, rural life, farmers, small towns, really did not have a say, a way to get information, a way to get training on all of the new information coming out of universities, out of the government. There was an issue. They cut off and it wasn't happening. And he and 6 other gentlemen and a lady realized they needed to do something. And that's how the Grange was organized, as a way to educate rural America. At this present time, there's about 1,500 local Granges. That's 1,500 Granges in communities throughout the United States. Now that sounds like a small number, but I think it's important to realize that Granges just don't focus on their local community where they might be. Granges impact numerous communities around them. My local Grange in New Jersey We not only touched probably 5 different townships in 2 different counties. And that's important to realize as we move forward with this initiative and this partnership with Rural Minds is that's the way, the network we have of getting information out, giving people the opportunity to learn about the important message that Rural Minds and their other organizations are trying to get out there to America. We have that network. And that's one of the tenets of the Grange. One of our very first tenets was education, educating our members on the new and improved agricultural practices. And the members realized, well, that's good, but now we need to educate the community. We're learning this. We need to be able to impact our local community because don't forget, 1860s, 1870s, wasn't a lot of social media back then. So you only learned by meetings you went to and word of mouth. And Grange just had that opportunity to impact their communities in such a wide variety of ways. And you have to also think back in that time frame. The Grange was the first organization that gave women equal voice, equal vote, but also you joined the Grange at 14 years of age, you had the same voice and vote of someone who had been a member for 50 years. Well, not 50 years ago, it wasn't, back then, but age-wise. And that's important to realize that the Grange has always been very cognizant of the fact that, it's important to impact our members, impact our communities in positive ways, and give people the opportunity to grow. And that is how this partnership with Rural Minds, I believe, and the national leadership believes, is a great opportunity for us to use our network throughout the United States to help get information out there. And as we move forward, that's what we're going to do. We are going to take the information that Rural Minds folks come up with, whether it's brochures, whether it's programming ideas, whatever, you have that ability, and those mental health professionals, those mental health organizations who know what information needs to go out and how it needs to be presented. And that's what we're going to rely on, is as we put all these brochures together along, well, the partnership of everybody puts these brochures together, programming ideas, outreach ideas. How can we utilize our membership? How can we utilize our Grange halls in a way to help individuals that need to get this information? And that's what our focus is going to be. And we're excited, Julie, to have this opportunity to work with all of you to make this happen.
Well, Pete, we are excited to work with the National Grange, and we can't thank you and all of your members enough. And I'm delighted that I couldn't hear you, but everybody else could. And that's the most important thing, because they got to hear about this great partnership. And we'll be sharing more information about this partnership as we move forward. So thanks for taking time to be with us, Pete, and to get the ball rolling with this partnership between the Grange and Rural Minds. But
thank you.
Now, thank you, sir. Now we are going to move on to remind some of you that were on our original webinar back on April 13th, that one of our guests that evening was Jeff Ditzenberger. Jeff is a Wisconsin farmer, and he shared some of his own very powerful personal experiences about attempting suicide, confronting and managing his bipolar 2 disorder, returning to farming, and founding TUGS, a mental health nonprofit. And he'll tell us more about what TUGS means, I'm sure. We are very fortunate to have Ditz back again tonight to tell us more about his courageous story, and he has graciously agreed to answer questions from the audience. So we will do that. We'll do that after he shares some of his stories. But we do recognize and appreciate that any discussion about mental illness and suicide may be disturbing or triggering to some individuals. So if you or someone is experiencing a mental health crisis or suicidal thoughts, please reach out immediately to the Suicide Prevention Hotline Lifeline. And we have this number 800-273-8255, or text HOME, HOME, to the crisis text line at 741-741. And all of these services are free and confidential. But now we would like to get back to the gentleman who is returning for our second webinar by popular demand, Jeff Ditzenberger, to share his story about his own struggles with mental illness and what he has done to help remove that stigma and encourage those conversations. So please join me in welcoming back Jeff Ditzenberger.
Well, thank you. I don't know what popular demand means in your neck of the woods, but the two people I'm sure that did that, I'm forever gracious for. So good evening and welcome to everybody. My name is Jeff Ditzenberger. I go by Ditz. That has nothing to do with my character. It has to do with my last name. And I always joke that it took me 4 years of first grade to figure out how to spell it. I told my mom, why couldn't you have married a Smith or a Jones or something a little bit easier to spell, but it is what it is. So I'm very pleased to be back here for the second time. I'm going to give you a little bit of my story, a little bit of how my nonprofit was founded, and definitely take questions and answers. And I guess I just want to lean in real quick. I know, these are hard conversations to have. These are hard things to listen to. And I would like to reiterate what Julie said. If you're struggling, if you need to talk to someone, please call the hotline, text one of the other moderators that are here, text the Hope line. They're good people. They're volunteers that will help you through a tough situation that you might be in. But when we talk about tough situations, I guess, from my own personal experience, the conversation about suicide and mental health is definitely a tough conversation, but the conversation that's even more tough is to or harder is to have that conversation with family members when someone ends their life by suicide. So a little bit about myself. I grew up on a small dairy farm in South Wayne, Wisconsin. Our town was like 460 people, and I think it was like 400 on the weekends because everybody went to the big city to do fun things. Came from a small family, mom, dad, and one brother. My parents actually must have really liked me because I was an only child for 10 years and then decided that maybe they should add another one. I'll never forget the morning that my parents told me that they were expecting. Dad said to me, "Yeah, we're getting you a playmate," and I was so hoping it was a puppy, but I was severely disappointed to find out I was getting a brother instead. But there's 10 years difference between us. He's a great little brother, and I'm glad I had him too. Shortly after I graduated high school, I rolled Dad's truck, and it seemed like a really good idea to go in the military at that time because I figured there would be less punishment in the military than there would be at home for rolling the truck. And I will tell you, as a 17-and-a-half-year-old who had to have his parents sign for him to get in the military, when you raise your right hand and promise to defend your country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, the last thing you think about is getting yourself involved in a war. I went to boot camp in Great Lakes the summer of '88. For those of you that are old enough to remember the summer of '88, it was hot and it was dry. And I remember doing push-ups on a very hot blacktop in Great Lakes, and said to myself numerous times, I wish I was back at the farm throwing straw and hay bales around. It was a lot easier than what I was doing in the military. Married my high school sweetheart, and one of the things that I have with some of my diagnosis is that I have relationship anxiety. And my first marriage, I knew she had cheated on me a few times, but I was already questioning my self-worth with some things that had happened and thought I couldn't do any better and things would get better if we got married. And so we got married. We spent 32 days together out of our first year of marriage, because when I got back to California, where I was stationed at, we were sent to Westpac. And what Westpac is a Western Pacific tour. Every Navy does that at different times. On the East Coast, it's called an East Pac. but it's a 6-month excursion. We do a lot of drills and testing and training and stuff like that. But on the way back, the ship that was supposed to take over for us couldn't pass their qualifications. So we ended up having to stay out for almost another 6 months, and saw a lot of things, but not boots on the ground. And a lot of people will say, well, if you weren't, a military person who was boots on the ground and, actually saw fighting, like, why would you have PTSD from that? Well, let me tell you why. So the ship that I was on was the second largest displacement ship next to an aircraft carrier. And we were a replenishment ship. Actually, hopefully you guys can see this. If you look at the ship in the middle, that's the ship that I was on, and we were refueling these other two ships. So that gives you kind of an idea of how big the ship that I was on. Now, keep in mind, the ship that I'm on has half of it is full of diesel fuel, half of it is full of jet fuel. The rest of it is full of cargo and ammunition. So we were kind of like a really classy floating 7-Eleven. And I said to one of the guys on the ship one time after we'd been out for a while, I asked one of the guys that have been in the service for a while, I said, hey, Chief, how come when we're out here in the ocean, like there's nobody close to us? Like the closest ship is like 35 miles away. And he goes, well, that's because when a missile hits us, it's 25 miles of chaos and then another 10 miles of repercussions. Doesn't make a guy sleep real well at night when you're only 19 years old. And we spent a lot of time at general quarters. And so stress was a huge thing. And let me tell you, in the military, they don't talk to you, at least back in the 80s and early 90s, they didn't talk to you about stress a whole lot. I got out of the service. I came back to Wisconsin. I worked a couple of jobs and finally got into a job that I really liked, running a wastewater treatment plant for a cheese company and a whey plant. And they were doing some things that weren't necessarily probably the best practices that they should have been. And I was kind of under a little bit of some stress because we were trying to make sure that nobody found out that we were doing these things. And I ended up having a DNR representative show up at my door at 7 o'clock one morning. First thing that surprised me was that the DNR gets up that early. Second thing was that they were at my house and they asked me a bunch of questions. I went into work later that day and got pulled into the office, and they told me that there may be a potential of DNR agents talking to us. And I said, I already talked to one. I told them what I told them, and was let go shortly after that. I was also working for a local farmer at the time and helping him milk cows and do chores and stuff like that. And was having some problems in my marriage at the time too. And I became really good friends with a couple of guys by the name of Jack and Jose and Captain. And I remember asking my male friends, can we just have a conversation? Like, can we sit down and talk? Like, I'm having a rough day. And it was always the same response: suck it up, buttercup, or, men don't cry, or, I'll ask the question, how many of you in the audience have heard the saying, quit crying or I'll give you something to cry about? And that annoys me. Like, we're given these emotions for a reason so that we can express how we're feeling. And one of the things as young men, we're kind of taught to sequester those emotions, to try to push those emotions down. And that bothers me. And we'll get into that a little bit more here down the road. But it got to the point with my drinking where I was having whiskey in the morning in my coffee. I would put some in my I put some brandy in I put coffee in my brandy. Basically, I would put brandy in my coffee before I would go to work in my thermos. I would go to lunch and I would have a couple of beers with lunch, maybe a couple shots. On the way home, I would grab a bottle of something or a case of something. And it was nothing for me to put that away before the next morning. And it did a great job of deadening the pain for a while. But then the next morning, not only did I have a headache, but also had to function and face the demons that I was having in my head. I tried to get some help. I tried to get into to see a psychiatrist or psychologist. And of course I did that on the sly, because God forbid if we should go to see a therapist, man up, handle your own stuff. And anyways, back then it was like at that time, I want to say probably a 4 to 8 week process to get in. Currently, I talked to quite a few mental health providers in the area, and I have a lot of friends who are also mental health providers, and they're talking 6 to 8 months, if not more. And that obviously concerns me. So I also made the mistake of reading my wife's diary. Now, for those of you in the audience that don't know what a diary is, that's where us old people used to keep our secrets. We would write them down on a piece of paper in cursive. And nowadays, I think they call it Facebook. But regardless, we would, I made the mistake of reading her diary when we were moving, and found out that she had cheated on me 6 weeks after we were married, and just kind of went downhill from there. Like, I started to spiral even worse, because there's nothing worse than, having problems at work and then finding out that someone doesn't love you enough to stay faithful to you. And at this point in time is when I started to, for lack of better terms, plot or plan my suicide. Another misconception out there: suicide is an irrational, quick thought that happens immediately. It's not. I planned my suicide for over 6 weeks. 6 weeks of writing a letter, 6 weeks of giving away my prized possessions, 6 weeks of friends telling me, "Hey, we'll see you later, Ditz." And I was like, "Nah, I don't know about that," or yeah, maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Classic signs that we talk about nowadays, or we try to talk about nowadays, that nobody caught on to. So I ended up throwing a birthday party for my mother. I drank quite a bit that night. It was a surprise birthday party. She was super surprised, mostly because I got the date right. Long story behind that, but a fun family story. But anyways, I thought my pager for the volunteer fire department that I was on went off. Now, I did find out years later, months later, that it was just a low battery alarm, but it triggered something in my brain. Now, we talk about triggers, and there's a lot of social media and regular media fun made of triggers. They kind of poke fun at those things, and triggers are real. Triggers happen. Triggers are things that none of us want to have, but we do have them, and it's try to be aware of them. But they can affect us in some really, really negative ways, and we can't get a grip on them quite as quick as we'd like to. Anyways, I took my wife home, dropped her off, went to an old abandoned house, and walked inside that old abandoned house and lit it on fire. And that's how I was going to end my life. Now, there's some irony in this, and I chuckle about it. And a lot of times when I give presentations in live venues, they chuckle, and it's okay to laugh about it a little bit. But I wrote my suicide note on a piece of paper that I put in my pocket, and then walked into a building I was going to set on fire. Really crappy planning on my part. Like, my message wasn't going to get out, obviously, as to why I did this. And I was pretty brutal in that letter too. I told some people, that where they could go and they could take a flying leap. And I apologized to my family, and I apologized to my baby brother and whatnot. And anyways, had I been successful, nobody would have ever known why I did in the first place. But then all of a sudden I was like, why am I here? Like, why am I inside this burning building? And I went ahead and I actually went next door to a neighbor, because cell phones weren't super popular at that time. Knocked on their door. This is like, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning, midnight, something like that. Scared the heck out of them. Dialed 911, and then went to the call with the fire department that I was on. And one of the firefighters must have noticed that something wasn't quite right. So he wasn't letting me do a lot of the stuff that normally would have done at a fire call. The next morning, I milked cows for the farmer I was working for. He called me at about 8:30, and he said, "Hey, did you milk cow 275?" And I said, "Of course I milk cow 275. She's my favorite cow." And he goes, "Well, it doesn't look like she's milked, and I don't want you working for us anymore." So now I've lost my second job, which also included my housing. So I'm kind of like already starting to spiral again. Go home, get a call from the sheriff's department. And they told me that they thought that I had some very important information in regards to the fire from the night before. And I'm like, I would be more than glad to help out. So I went into the sheriff's department, and the detective at that time was Sergeant Pepper, not from the band, but Sergeant Pepper basically told me, he says, we're pretty sure that you set the fire last night. And I'm like, there's no way I could have done that. And he goes, I think there's something going on with you, but you have two choices. I can either arrest you and charge you with arson, or you can go to the mental ward up at the hospital. Now, when you think about mental institutions or mental wards, you know, for those of you that have been around for a while or have done any kind of research, they used to be called insane asylums. Asylum in itself is a safe word. Asylum is someplace where you're supposed to be able to feel safe, to be okay, to find some sanctuary. And let's be honest, the insane asylums were not. But I will tell you, I've made a lot of really good choices in my life. And one of the first ones I made was going to the mental ward up at the hospital. And I'll tell you why. Because I got there and there was no judgment. Like, I talked about my feelings. I talked about what was going on with me. 3 days later, they took me out in handcuffs and went to the courthouse, and I got charged with felony arson. So here I am, a veteran and a firefighter who's just about to lose a lot of his freedoms, and ended up going through the court case. I was front page news all the time, not telling anybody that I had tried to end my life. Now, you're probably out there saying, well, why didn't you tell anybody, Ditz? Well, I'll tell you why. Because I was less embarrassed of having a felony arson charge on my record than I was of admitting that I tried to die by suicide. So fast forward quite a few years, I do my jail time, I do my community service, I paid back the insurance company, and years later, 2014, I'm asked to, I had been elected as Greene County Farm Bureau president. I'd been president for a couple of years, and blogs became popular. For those of you that don't remember, blogs are something we used to do where we'd type out a whole bunch of stuff and we'd put it on the internet, and people would read it. And Farm Bureau had asked me to do a blog as county president, and I did it on mental health, farmers and mental health. And when I sent it up to them, the first thing they said was absolutely not. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, first of all, do you want everybody to know your secrets? And I'm like, everybody knows my secrets. Everybody knows I was in jail. Everybody knows that I did this community service. Everybody knows all this kind of stuff. What they didn't know was that it had been a suicide attempt. And that was one of the first times that I admitted to it. And I told them flat out, I says, if we're not going to have this conversation, then you can cancel my membership. You can kick me out of the organization, whatever, send me back a refund. But this is something we need to talk about, because it's threefold. One, it was a lot about men and talking about their feelings. Also, we were talking about rural America, where we don't have a lot of access to mental health facilities or mental health help. And the third part of it is that now we're finally going to start having a conversation, period. So they finally agreed to print it, and it went viral. I got people from all over the place thanking me for, speaking out and stuff. And at that point, I kind of got inspired and I wanted to do more, but I couldn't figure out how could I do more. And it wasn't too long after that was the communications director for Wisconsin Farm Bureau Federation at the time, Casey Langen, got a hold of me. And Casey's one of my favorite people in the world. Casey gets a hold of me and he's like, hey, Ditz, my wife wants to talk to you. Can I give her your number? And I was like, okay, I'm sure I'm good with that. So she ends up calling me and she asked me if I would speak at what was called Dane County's Safe Communities Guys Night Out. Now, Dane County is where Madison, Wisconsin is. Madison is our capital. So it's a big area. And she's like, would you be willing to speak at this Guys Night Out? And I'm like, oh, Guys Night Out, heck yeah. I'm thinking pizza and beer, and we can talk crap about people and, just have a good old time. And anyways, I agreed to do it. And the day we went up there, I went with my best friend and my uncle, who's a paranoia schizophrenic, who my family cut out of the rafters when I was a freshman in high school. And then his best friend. And on the way up there, I was kind of hungry. And I was like, hey, can we pull through a McDonald's drive-through? Bad idea when you're already nervous. And kind of on edge anyways. So I had like 3 bites of my cheeseburger, and I'm looking at my speech, and I hate writing speeches. I'll be honest. I hate writing speeches. So I ripped it up and I threw it away. And my uncle goes, "Isn't that your speech?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." He goes, "What are you going to talk about?" I'm like, "I have no idea." We get up there, and already I'm disappointed because it's not just guys. There's a room full of people, a lot more people than I was expecting. And it's a mixture of guys and women. And I'm like, oh, this changes the dynamics of things too. So they introduced me and they talked a little bit about my Navy career and in the introduction. And I got up there, and all of a sudden I started to think, as I was talking about my Navy career, remember how I said that I was on the 2nd largest displacement ship next to an aircraft carrier? So we're huge. In order for us to get back into port safely, or if we broke down in the middle of the ocean, which believe it or not has happened more than once, or if we had to get down a narrow, like locks and dams or anything like that, we'd have to call a tugboat. And the cool thing about a tugboat is that you can't really see them because they're tiny, but you can hear their little toot toot from their little whistle, and you can see their little puffs of smoke. And when you're going into port and they're using a tugboat, the ship goes completely down. Like they shut everything off other than electricity. And we always joked about it was so quiet, so eerily quiet that you could hear the fish eating the barnacles off the side of the ship. And you're sitting there and you're waiting, and there's kind of this calm that comes over you. Well, there's first some anticipation, but then you feel this little bump and you kind of feel that motion of the ship moving, and you have this calm come along you, and then you feel another little bump, and here the tugboat has pushed you in, and then he leaves, and then there's a voice that comes over this magical box across the whole ship and basically says, "Hey, we're home, and we're back home safe." And I was thinking to myself while I was saying that, why couldn't life be like that? Like, what if you were a really big ship and you needed to get home safe? Or what if you were in treacherous waters and you needed something to guide you down those treacherous waters? Or what if you just fell apart in the middle of the ocean and you needed to get back in to get fixed? What if you could call a tugboat? And so on the way home, I'm all excited and stuff. And I said to my best friend, Scott, I'm like, Scott, like, I want to start a nonprofit. And of course, the first words out of his mouth were, "Well, you already farm. Do you really want another nonprofit?" And I said, "Yes, I understand that." I said, "But I want a nonprofit. Like, I want to start a thing that doesn't have as much government regulation." Also a lie, apparently. But anyways, I laid awake that night, and all of a sudden about 2 o'clock in the morning, it came to me. TUGS, talking, understanding. And we originally called it growth and support, but I didn't like it because it didn't have the ing on it. Anyways, I got on my dial-up computer and I sent it to Scott, and I'm like, "Hey, I came up with this idea. This is what we're going to do, blah, 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 blah." The next day we got together and we talked about it, and started the process of starting the nonprofit TUGS, because and our tagline is, even big ships need little ships sometimes. And we eventually changed it to talking, understanding, growing, and supporting. We got a logo, we got a mission statement, we put together a board of directors, with one of the sole purposes, though, that we're trying to do is we're trying to stop the stigmas surrounding mental health. We're trying to get it so that you can have those conversations. My board consists of people that are veterans, firefighters, police department people, social workers. We've all got our own little niche that we do. One of the things that I handle a lot is talking to farmers in rural America. And why that is that it was 2 years after I started the organization, I got asked by some psychiatrists and psychologists if I would come in and talk to them about how to talk to farmers, because the language is so different. And, we don't think about those kinds of things really, especially with the farming side of it. Farming is getting more and more removed, generations are getting bigger and bigger. But I had a psychiatrist that said to me, he goes, "I had this guy in Ditz, and he was talking about hundredweight milk and how he wasn't getting enough for his hundredweight for milk. And that, his production was down, and bushels this and all these terms that I have no idea what he means." And I'm thinking to myself, that's probably kind of important. So that's one of the things that my organization does, is that we're trying to, bridge that gap between rural and the town, or however you want to put it, to kind of bring some commonality there. One of the other things that we're doing is, the idea behind TUGS is that you find someone, we help you find someone that you can talk to when you're having those times of trouble. But it's not someone who's going to sugarcoat it necessarily. And I'll give you an example. So I called one of my TUGs, Scott, who's, like I said, one of my best friends. Called him one day and I said to him, I go, Scott, I'm having a bad day. He goes, what's your problem? What's so bad about it? I says, I don't like my lunch. And he's like, why don't you like your lunch? I said, because it's leftovers. And he's like, who packs your lunch? And I says, my wife does. And he's like, pack your own lunch. And I was like, that's not what I want to hear. Like, I want you to validate my crappy day because of my lunch. But when the guy that I farm with got diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago and we almost lost him, and I called Scott because I needed to vent, I literally sobbed and had words through the sobbing, trying to explain to him what was going on. And all he said on the other end was, I'm here, brother. I'm here. I'm listening. I'm here. And that's what we want to do, is we want to help big ships find those little ships and be able to have those conversations. One of the other things that we're really starting to get ramp up on is trying to get rid of toxic positivity. If you're having a bad day, the last thing you want to hear is it's going to be better tomorrow, because you don't know if it's going to be better tomorrow. And why do we even say that? Why is that a phrase that comes out? Or things like, oh, somebody's got it worse than you. Well, yeah, they probably do, but they're not the one experiencing what I'm experiencing right now. I have a vision that I want to see us in rural America and across the United States and in our society and across the world, that we can validate people's bad days. We validate everything good all the time, but we don't validate bad days. And I think some of it is just the human nature in us to try to make things feel better, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. And I think about the impact that people have. And I'll tell you a little story that, if you don't think you have impact, if you're one of those people out there that doesn't think you have impact, let me tell you my little story about a guy I met at Quick Trip. Now, Quick Trip in Wisconsin is like our second church. Like, they have everything there. Dads will tell their daughters, if you can't find a boyfriend at Quick Trip, you're probably never going to get married. But anyways, I was there one day getting some stuff, and you know how it is in rural America. A lot of times we go into our little stores and stuff. And we're like, hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? And it may not even be somebody we know. And usually it's, oh, doing good, or, hey, I'm having a great day, or whatever. And I said this in Quick Trip, and this guy says, why do you care? And I says, well, I do. Like, I want to know. I like people to have good days. And he goes, but do you care? And I says, actually, I do. And he goes, well, fine. He says, I think my cat's dying. And I says, why do you think your cat's dying? And he says, well, because I feed her and water her, and then she makes this really weird noise, and like, she looks like she wants to like throw up or whatever. And I'm like, it sounds to me like your cat's got a hairball. And he's like, what are you, a veterinarian? And I go, no, but I've had a lot of cats. And he goes, what do I do? What do I do? And I says, it's really pretty easy. I says, you just go ahead and get yourself some cat hairball remedy. You can go to Walmart or Farm and Fleet or, local store. They have them. I says, give it to your cat. I said, I'll tell you right now, it's going to be gross, but she'll do some things that'll probably make you want to kind of hurl too. But he says it should make her better. If she doesn't, then take her to your vet. Thank you. We parted ways. Six weeks later, I'm in Quick Trip again. And just as I'm getting ready to pay for my breakfast, this hand slams down and he says, I'm paying for this gentleman's breakfast. And I turn around and here it's Cat Guy. And I don't know what Cat Guy's name is to this day because I never asked him. And he goes, do you remember who I am? And I go, yeah, you're the guy with the cat. And he goes, good, we need to talk outside. The first thought that went through my mind was, does Quick Trip have cameras outside? Because this sounds like it may not end well. Is this like a last meal or what? Anyways, we go outside and he tells me, he says, you were right. He says, not only did my cat have a hairball, but it was disgusting. And I said, so she's doing good. And he's like, she is doing amazing. He goes, thank you very much. And I'm like, I'm glad that this turned out all right. And he says, have a great day. And he says, no, you don't know the whole story. And I says, okay. And he says, that same morning, he goes, when I left my apartment, he said, I have just moved here from across the United States. He says, I came here to start a new job. And when I got to that new job, the first day I was supposed to work, they didn't need me anymore. They had cut my position and never told me. So here I am in this little tank town. And the first thing I thought to myself was, we're not a tank town. I mean, we've got grocery stores and stuff. But anyways, he says, I don't know anybody. I haven't met any new friends because I've only been here for like 2 weeks. I was kind of looking forward to the job and meeting some people there. He says, when I left the apartment building that morning and I shut my door, he said, I told myself that if my cat died, I was going to die with my cat. And I think about that. I think about that conversation literally every single day since then. How many people do we come in contact with that we could just say a few kind words and it makes all the difference in the world? You know, we've gotten ourselves so drawn into social media and keyboard warriors, and we text people nowadays. And I hate texting. I honestly hate texting. I like to have conversations because I want to hear that voice on the other end. I want to know, you know, you can send somebody, you know, Chuck, I can send Chuck a text that says, you know, how you doing? And he might reply back, okay. But did that mean okay or okay or okay? We don't take the time to listen. We don't take the time to reach out. And that's one of the things that we need to start doing. Julie, I see you're back on. Are you cutting me off?
Well, I'm not cutting you off at all, Ditz, because this has been amazing. Your story is fascinating, and the fact that you tell it with such a wonderful sense of humor is that I think resonates, you know, so well with people. That but your sincerity and your caring certainly does come through loud and clear. But we do have some questions from folks, and we want to have truth in advertising here. We said we would take questions. I do want to remind people, if you have a question, please use the Q&A, not the chat, but the Q&A function, and we'll be happy to answer those. But I'm getting these from Webinar Central here, and the first question for you is, and this goes along with the story you were just telling, I think, but what signs should people look for if they suspect a friend or loved one, or even someone they meet in Quick Trip, is having challenges or even contemplating suicide?
I think a lot of it is, first of all, is even attitude changes. And I'm not talking like a quick attitude change. I'm talking like, you know, like Jody is a super happy person during the work week normally. And then all of a sudden, like 3-4 days in a row, she's kind of distant. She's not talking to people as much. You know, those kind of signs. And I always tell people, err on the side of caution. I would much rather ask somebody if they're okay and have them say, yeah, you know, I had a family member pass away, or yeah, I took a test the other night for my school class and I didn't really do as good as I wanted to, and stuff like that. For two reasons. So, Julie, one is that it answers the question from my standpoint, you know, and gets not really rid of some of my concern, but it kind of calms my concern down some. But the other thing it does is that it plants that seed of hope in people. If you take the time to ask people how they're doing, if you take the time to, and there's a misconception out there that people think that if you, from a suicide standpoint, if you ask somebody if they're suicidal, it's going to make them more suicidal. And it's the exact opposite. I will tell you right now that if somebody would have come up to me and said, hey, Ditz, are you thinking about killing yourself? Or are you having suicidal thoughts? Or, you know, are you in a bad place? I would have gladly said, yes, I am. But nobody ever did that. You know, they just, like I said, they told me to man up or suck it up, buttercup, or, you know, that kind of stuff. So I think, you know, being aware of your surroundings, being aware of those people that are close to you, and it just never hurts. If you even suspect, be like, hey, are you okay today? Like, you know, and they might say, oh yeah, I'm just deep in thought, or but even if they're not having a bad day that day, or they're not having any kind of a rough spot or anything, 3 weeks from now, when they do, you might be that person they come up to and say, hey, so the other day you asked me if I was okay, and I was then, but I'm not now. Can we have a conversation?
And then when they open up, then what's the next step for you?
So for me, basically, I'm one of those that I ask them what they want. Like, do you just need me to listen? I'll tell you what, Julie, I used to be the worst listener. We need to train ourselves to just shut everything down. And here's what I do. So say that person comes to you and you've got to be in a meeting in 15 minutes. You tell them, hey, I've got to be in a meeting in 15 minutes, but I really want to talk to you about this. Can we set up a time to talk? 9 times out of 10, they'll be fine doing that. If not, you may want to recommend the national. I mean, if they're suicidal, you may want to recommend the National Suicide Hotline, something like that. Usually when I have those conversations, and I've had a lot of those conversations, a lot of those conversations, when you get people to promise you that they're not going to act on their impulses and that they'll wait for you to have that conversation, they will definitely do that. 2,
Okay.
if you do set aside the time to talk to them, make sure you follow through on it. And when you get with them, shut your phone off. Get rid of any kind of distractions that you can do. Also, don't do this in the middle of the lunchroom or the break room. Do this off to the side or whatever the case may be. And then obviously, not that I have to say this, but I do anyways, don't talk to other people about it, after that's been done, and I tell people, I tell people that come into my office, I tell people that I meet on the street, I tell people that message me late at night, I will not reveal anything that you tell me unless I think you're in, a lot of danger or something like that. But otherwise, sit down and have that conversation with them. The other thing that is kind of good to do is, give them some validation. If they're one of those people that says, man, nobody likes me and nobody this and nobody that, if you have something that was good, like say you had a company Christmas party 2 years ago and they gave the boss this really cool mug, and the boss, and the boss loves that mug. He uses it every day. He even dropped it and it cracked a little bit and he fixed it because he loves that mug so much. You say to them, hey, remember that mug that you gave to the boss? He loves that mug. Like nobody else gave him that mug. You make him, he thinks about that day every single day of his life since then, because people want to be appreciated and valued. And so that's kind of where that process goes. And then the next thing you can do is, maybe it's something that's pretty rough. Ask them if there's someone else they want to talk to. Maybe it's their pastor. Maybe it's like for the kids, like a lot of the youth that I deal with, and I coach girls softball, so I'm kind of used to this too. Maybe they have a favorite coach that they'll talk to, or maybe they'll talk to the school guidance counselor or a certain teacher, or, another adult in the community that they can be completely and open and upfront with. If they go to a professional type person, offer to go with them. Say, hey, I will help you get there. I will, especially like with the farming community. I can't tell you the number of farmers that I've said to, hey, I can get you somebody to watch your animals for the day. I will gladly drive you to the facility that you want to go to or the appointment you want to go to. I will sit with you, sit outside, but we are going to go through this together, and then the other thing we need to do is follow up. And when I say follow up, I don't mean with a text message. I mean, we call them and say, hey, Joe, how you doing today? How are things going? Are things getting better? How's your therapy going? And the thing of it is the more conversation, especially candid conversation that we have, the more they start to say, and the more that they get out, and the better things they get out of therapy, and the better things that they get out with their family, and they start enjoying things more. And when they get, like for me, with all the diagnosis that I have, I fight battles every day inside my head. And I think of things that make me happy. I think of my beautiful significant other. I think of her daughter, who's like my little, like we do all kinds of stuff together. I coached her in softball, and she at 15, even at 12, was asking me more questions about suicide and mental health than any adult ever has. And I think about my 2-year-old granddaughter. I think about my kids. I think about all the wonderful people that I've met now over the past, how many years since my own suicide attempt. I have to find something that goes on. But if we validate their anxiety, if we validate their sad feelings, if we validate their depression and make them feel normal, the response is absolutely astounding.
Well, it just takes that one initial outreach. And I wrote down toxic positivity. I'm going to remember that. But we have another question, and this has to do with TUGS. Someone would like you to talk a little bit more about TUGS. How widespread is it? Is this an organization that's just in the Midwest or nationally? And do you see, when you talk to people, I know you do a lot of speaking engagements. Do you see differences from region to region in the country?
So TUGS itself, I originally started that to kind of, help my community, Greene County, Rock County, Lafayette, like kind of the surrounding area. And then HBO Vice News showed up, and then there was a whole bunch of podcasts, and then A&E Network showed up and did a documentary. And now I'm kind of worldwide. I've had people reach out to me from all over the world, literally all over the world, farmers from Africa, people from the Philippines, people from Germany, people from all walks of life. So I don't even know where this thing is going to go. Like I would love, my legacy for TUGS would be that there would be some kind of a TUGS organization in every single community. And I don't care what they call it. You can call it whatever you want to. I mean, it's like rural minds. Like I would love to see those kind of things going on to where, you know, we can teach people that it's okay to talk to other people about your feelings, and those people aren't going to be judgmental, and they're going to be there to help you. And we will do more and more and more and more and more to reduce the stigma surrounding suicide and mental health. That would be my ultimate dream, to have that happen. Am I going to facilitate it all? No, I've got enough on my plate as it is, but I've helped a couple other, like there's like some of the colleges that I've talked to, you know, their fraternities are starting their own little group to talk to. There was a Subway sandwich shop out in Colorado that called me after some bad things that happened there, and they were trying to help their employees, and they started their own internal thing. So this is something we can do. Everybody on this call could do this. You know, if you're at your job or at your, you know, in your community, like you could have the Purple Ribbon Project. If somebody's walking around with a purple ribbon on them, that means that's the person that you can talk to if you're having, you know, if you're having struggles. Region to region, the second question that you had on there, with all the speaking I do, does it vary from region to region? Absolutely. However, the one commonality is that the lack of mental health help is consistent across the board. When you ask what the biggest challenge is in every single one, and I've spoken quite a few places. I've spoken at some major colleges. I've spoke for a lot of government entities. I spoke in front of 300 farm bankruptcy attorneys. It's a common thing. How can we get more help? Well, do we necessarily need more help? Like, is some of this maybe the fact that people are, you know, not everybody that talks to me is in a crisis situation. Some of them just want to talk. And we could do that as average, ordinary, everyday citizens. We can have those conversations. Obviously, we're not going to diagnose or put them on medication or anything like that. But it's amazing. You know, I would have to say, Julie, on average, I talk to about 75 to 80 people a month easily. I would say probably, if I did statistics on that, 80% of them just want somebody to listen for a minute.
And not be judgmental.
Correct.
So just to have that ear. And, you know, we talked about the stigma in rural America, and that's one of your missions, is to help end that stigma. Is there anything else when it comes to that stigma? And before you answer that, I just want to say something. You're talking about this groundswell and people across the country, and I saw Pete Pompper pop up there for a moment, and you know, that's what Rural Minds is hoping. You know, one of the things that we're doing with the Grange is making that connection, because as we know, there's Grange halls and rural communities all across the country, and this may be yet another conduit to having those conversations and having those understanding ears to listen. But go back to the stigma for just a minute, because I know that's you know, you've talked about that a lot. And what else needs to be done to help to ease that stigma?
You know, Julie, we talk about a lot of things in society now. We talk about you know, abuse and rape and sexual assault and, you know, a bevy of other things that are bad that go on. And we talk about COVID. We talk about COVID still every single day now today. You know, why can't we talk about mental health the same way that we've talked about COVID for the last 2.5 years? Suicide is the number one. I will say this to the day I die. Suicide is the number one most preventable death. And people will say, well, how is that? I says, just be kind, try it. You'd be amazed at how much difference it makes when we change our mindsets, when we hear somebody has PTSD. You know, it's not like having COVID. COVID's contagious. PTSD is not. And we were, you know, I said during the mask mandate, I says, you know, masks hide smiles, smiles hide depression. Just, you know, we need to reduce that stigma. We need to talk about it. We need to tell people it's okay. You know, I find it interesting, the youth that I deal with, when I tell them I'm bipolar, the number of them will come up and say, so explain that to us. And I'm like, it's like a roller coaster. And it's like, but it's not a fun roller coaster, but you can kind of make it a fun roller coaster. But we can talk about it. People talk about cancer all the time. People talk about the common cold all the time. People talk about flu all the time. We talk about all these other things that affect our health. And I would also think, part of me is kind of like, what if we called it mental wellness instead of mental health?
Just changing the language might change the perception a little.
We talk about people committing suicide. And if I hear anybody say the words commit suicide, the first things I say is died by suicide. Well, what's the difference? It's huge. Go talk to somebody who lost a loved one and you'll find out just exactly how important it is to say died by suicide as opposed to committed suicide.
And I've learned that just recently, so that was something new. But I think, it does. It's a totally different meaning. So words do have a great deal of power.
Do you have any?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any more questions or no?
Let me look. No, I don't right now.
I want to real quick. I want to do my little demonstration. Normally I make people turn their cameras on. Tonight we're not going to do that. But Pete and Chuck, if you're still on, this is kind of an interactive part. It works better with more people. But so I'm just going to trust everybody's going to follow along with this. But everybody see this $20 bill? Yep.
Yes.
If you found this $20 bill on the ground, would you pick it up?
Yes.
Yep. All right. What if this $20 bill was folded up like this? If this $20 bill was folded up like this, would you pick it up? And you found it on the ground, would you pick it up?
I would.
Yep. Pete's shaking his head up and down too. If this $20 bill, I hope there's no way it works for a bank here. If this $20 bill was all crumpled up like this, if you see this $20 bill all crumpled up on the ground, would you pick it up?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I would too.
Yep.
That looks like money to me.
Yep. What if this $20 bill was all crumpled up and laying on the ground and it was kicked to the side into the grass and maybe even had like a little bit of dirt on it? Would you still pick that $20 bill up?
Yep.
Yep.
Probably.
And you want to know the interesting thing about this is that you can pick this. You'd have to pick this $20 bill up with the dirt and everything on it. And you have to take this $20 bill and you have to unfold it and uncrinkle it. And you smooth out all the rough edges and you get that little bit of dirt off of there. And the great thing is that this $20 bill never lost any of its value. People are the same way. People can be beat up, crumpled up, kicked to the curb, have dirt on them, be in the worst place possible. If you just pick them up and brush off that dirt and smooth out the rough edges, you will find that they have never lost their value.
Wow. Those are wonderful words and a wonderful thought. I don't think any of us will ever look at a $20 bill quite the same way again. Ditz, that was a great way to end here. Pete, very quickly, I think we actually have one quick question for you as we close here. And someone wanted to know if this is the first time that the Grange has addressed mental illness or mental wellness. We're also going to change our language here, mental wellness with your organization. So can you give us just a little more background on that?
Again, on a national level, absolutely. On a national level, absolutely, Julie. We have not had a national program like a lot of organizations have. And the main reason being, I don't know what each community needs, and the Granges there do, and they've addressed the needs in those communities. But listening to you and listening to Chuck and listening to Jeff and now Jeff and everybody, we need to get this information out there at the local level. And we're going to grasp this opportunity, and that's what we're going to do. And
we thank you. We thank you for that. We thank you again, Ditz, for sharing your story. Everyone watching, we thank you so much for your time. You will be receiving a short survey from us. We hope that you will take just a few moments, give us your feedback on this webinar. We'll be having more later on in the year. We hope you will please join us and participate in those as well. But and go to the ruralminds.org website to learn more about our organization. So again, to Pete, to Ditz, to everyone that's been watching, thank you so much for your participation, and good night.